Imagine walking into a courtroom expecting just another trial, but then the judge suddenly freezes. Why? Because the man standing in handcuffs is his childhood best friend. The stakes are higher than any poker table, you won't believe. How this gamble with fate plays out? The courtroom was silent. The only sound was the shuffle of papers and the nervous breaths of those waiting for the trial to begin. Judge Daniel Carter entered, his robe flowing behind him, his gavel tapping lightly against the desk as he settled in. He had presided over hundreds of cases before, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the tension in the air, or the unusually high-profile nature of the case. But he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest as he adjusted his robe and glanced around the courtroom. His eyes landed on the defendant and his heart skipped a beat. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he could barely focus. The man standing at the defendant's table wasn't just another accused criminal. It couldn't be. And yet it was Michael Harris, Daniel's childhood best friend, the same boy who had been his partner in mischief, his teammate in every backyard baseball game, and the one who had always had his back when things got rough. Memories flooded Daniel's mind in a torrent. Michael laughing as they raced down the street. Michael helping him climb the tallest tree in the neighborhood. Michael sharing the last slice of pizza when Daniel had forgotten his lunch. It felt impossible that the boy he had known was now wearing handcuffs and standing on the other side of the law. Daniel's mind raced. Could this really be him? The same kid he played baseball with in the park? The same boy who had stood by him when life was hard, cheering him on when he felt like giving up? The very idea seemed surreal, almost cruel. His eyes narrowed as he tried to focus on the courtroom proceedings. But every detail of Michael, the way he stood, the nervous twitch in his hand, the haunted look in his eyes pulled Daniel back. Into the past, the bailiff called the court to order, but Daniel barely heard it. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the tension so thick it felt like it might suffocate him. Everyone else in the courtroom was oblivious to the personal storm raging inside the judge. To them, it was just another trial. But for Daniel, everything had changed in an instant. As Michael looked up, their eyes met. Daniel could see the flicker of recognition there, too, the hesitation, the disbelief. For a fraction of a second, the courtroom faded away, leaving only two boys who had grown up together, now thrown into a reality neither of them could have imagined. The prosecutor began reading the charges, and the words hit Daniel like a hammer. Burglary, assault, repeat offenses. Michael's history of trouble, his brushes with the law, all of it painted a grim picture. Daniel tried to push the past aside and focus on the facts, but he couldn't ignore the boy he had known, the boy, full of energy, laughter, and hope. How had life led him here? How had the streets and bad choices replaced the playgrounds and baseball games of their childhood? Daniel's gaze softened. He remembered the nights they stayed up talking about their dreams, imagining lives that would take them far from their small neighborhood. He remembered promising each other that no matter what, they'd always look out for one another. And yet here they were, on opposite sides of the law, their paths diverging in ways neither could have predicted. He took a deep breath and steadied himself. He had a duty to the court, to the law, but his heart ached for Michael. The judge's gavel in his hand suddenly felt heavier than ever. Every word he spoke, every decision he made, would carry the weight of their shared past. And he knew he had to tread carefully. As the trial began, Daniel kept stealing glances at Michael. He noted the subtle changes, the nervous tapping of his foot, the way his hands shook ever so slightly. It reminded him of the shy, energetic boy who had once been his closest friend. And beneath the fear and desperation, he could still see glimpses of that boy, the same spark of intelligence, the same quick smile, the same unspoken bond that had tied them together as kids. The entire courtroom had no idea that this trial was about to take a very personal turn. For Daniel, it was no longer just about evidence, testimony, and justice. It was about a chance to find the truth, to see the man his friend had become, and maybe, just maybe, to give him a second chance at life. As he listened to the opening statements, Daniel realized one thing. Today's trial wouldn't just test Michael. It would test him too. His loyalty, his judgment, and his ability to separate the past from the present, all of it would be on the line. And in that moment, Daniel understood that some cases aren't just about the law. Some cases are about redemption, friendship, and the fragile thread that connects us to the people we once loved. Daniel and Michael had grown up in the same neighborhood, just 2 houses apart, in a small town where everyone knew each other. The streets were lined with oak trees that cast long shadows on the sidewalks, and summers stretched lazily, filled with laughter and endless possibilities. Back then, life was simple, uncomplicated, and full of dreams. From the earliest days, the two boys were inseparable. They built forts in the backyards, raced bikes down the quiet streets, and played pickup baseball games until the sun disappeared behind the horizon. Every day was an adventure. Michael, the wild and fearless one, was always challenging Daniel to push his limits, whether climbing higher in the trees than he dared or sneaking into places they knew they shouldn't be. Daniel, careful and thoughtful, was the perfect counterbalance, ensuring they didn't get into too much trouble. Despite their differences, they shared an unbreakable bond, almost like brothers. Michael's laughter was the soundtrack to Daniel's childhood, while Daniel's steady presence gave Michael a sense of security he didn't know he needed. They made promises to each other that summer nights would last forever, that no matter where life took them, they would always have each other's backs. School was another arena for their adventures. Michael was clever in ways that often got him into trouble, while Daniel excelled academically, always focused on following the rules. Yet the differences that might have pulled other friendships apart only strengthened theirs. Michael taught Daniel to take risks, to embrace life beyond the textbooks. Daniel grounded Michael, reminding him that discipline and patience were paths to achieving the dreams they both shared. Together, they felt unstoppable. As the years passed, the inevitability of growing up began to test their friendship. High school brought new challenges: the pressure to choose paths, the influence of peers, and the uncertainty of the future. Daniel's path was clear. He wanted to become a lawyer, inspired by a desire to fight for justice and fairness. He spent countless hours buried in books, attending debates, and preparing for college. Michael's path, however, was far less certain. The adventurous spirit that had once been harmless now flirted with danger. He struggled to hold jobs, faced financial hardships, and gradually fell in with a crowd that encouraged reckless choices. The boy who once climbed trees with Daniel now spent nights wandering streets, searching for shortcuts to survive. He made mistakes that built walls between him and the world, and eventually, between him and Daniel, the distance grew slowly, at first almost imperceptibly. Daniel's focus on law school, internships, and late-night study sessions left little time for long conversations or weekend adventures. Michael, meanwhile, drifted further, moving from job to job, city to city, chasing fleeting opportunities that never materialized. Letters went unanswered, calls were missed, and over time, they became memories of a childhood once shared. Despite the distance, Daniel never forgot Michael. He often found himself thinking of the wild, fearless boy with a heart of gold, wondering where life had taken him. Michael remained a symbol of freedom and rebellion, a reminder of the person Daniel could have been if life had handed him different cards. Then, years later, fate intervened in a way neither of them could have imagined. A chance encounter, or perhaps the invisible threads of destiny, brought them back together in the most unexpected and heartbreaking way. Daniel, now a respected judge, sat on the bench, presiding over a case that seemed ordinary at first. But when the defendant stepped into the courtroom, handcuffed and nervous, Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief. It was Michael, the same boy he had climbed trees with, raced bikes with, and shared secrets with in the quiet corners of their neighborhood. But this Michael was changed, older, hardened by life's challenges, and facing a trial that could alter his entire future. In that instant, Daniel felt a swirl of emotions he hadn't anticipated: shock, sorrow, nostalgia, and a deep, unshakable sense of responsibility. He realized that life had given them both paths filled with twists and turns, and now those paths had collided in a way neither could have foreseen. The courtroom, once a place of order and justice, had become a stage for a personal story. Decades In the making, Daniel couldn't help but reflect on the boy they once were and the men they had become. The past and present collided in his mind, and he understood something profound. Friendships forged in childhood can never truly be erased, even by time, distance, or hardship. And now the question loomed larger than ever: could he help his friend, just as he had once stood by him in the innocence of their youth? The case was serious. Michael was accused of burglary and assault. According to the prosecution, he had broken into a local convenience store late at night and attacked the owner when confronted. They painted a grim picture: Michael as a repeat offender, a man who had squandered every second chance life had given him, a man whose decisions had led him down a dark, destructive path. Witnesses testified to the chaos he had supposedly caused that fateful night, each account more damning than the last. Daniel sat silently on the bench, his expression neutral and professional as any judge would. But inside, his mind was in turmoil. Every word that came from the prosecution's side clashed violently with his memories of the boy he once knew. The Michael of his childhood had been thoughtful, adventurous in harmless ways, and generous to anyone in need. He had never imagined that this same person could be accused of such crimes. He remembered summer evenings spent with Michael, sharing ice cream cones on the corner of their street, racing bikes down the hill, and daring each other to climb higher in the oak trees behind their homes. That Michael, the boy who had once stood up for the smaller kids at school, was completely at odds with the man being described in the courtroom. The contrast was almost unbearable, Daniel tried to focus on. The proceedings, reminding himself that he was a judge first, a friend second. Every witness, every piece of evidence had to be weighed carefully, without personal bias. And yet, he could feel the heavy weight of their shared history pressing down on him. This wasn't just a case, it was his childhood friend, the boy, who had once been like a brother, sitting in front of him, accused of a crime that could ruin his life. When it was Michael's turn to speak, the courtroom quieted in anticipation. He stood slowly, his hands trembling slightly at the cuffs, and looked directly at Daniel. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. "Your Honor, I never thought I'd see you again." "And not like this," Michael said, his voice cracking with emotion. Ripple went through the courtroom. Gasps filled the air as everyone realized the extraordinary connection between judge and defendant. The atmosphere shifted instantly. What had been a routine legal proceeding became something intensely personal. Lawyers paused mid-sentence, the bailiffs exchanged confused glances, and the spectators leaned forward, sensing the drama that was about to unfold. Daniel's heart pounded. He could see the fear and shame in Michael's eyes, but also a flicker of the boy. He remembered the mischievous spark that had made him both infuriating and lovable. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional shuffle of papers and the distant murmur of whispers. He reminded himself to remain composed, but it was nearly impossible. Every memory, every shared laugh and adventure from decades ago surged forward, refusing to be ignored. Michael continued, his voice steadier now, though still tinged with emotion. He explained the events of that night in painstaking detail. He admitted he had been in the area near the store, but insisted he had never entered it or harmed anyone. Instead, he had been searching for food, trying to survive after months of living on the streets following a series of unfortunate circumstances. The hardship and desperation in his words were clear, and Daniel felt a pang of empathy. The defense attorney then presented evidence, grainy security footage from the store, showing a figure committing the crime, but the images were unclear. Witness testimonies had contradictions. The neighbor who had supposedly seen Michael fleeing the scene could not identify him with certainty. Slowly, the cracks in the prosecution's case began to show, and the courtroom began to shift from absolute certainty to cautious doubt. Daniel's mind raced as he processed everything. The boy he had grown up with had made mistakes, yes, but the man in front of him might not be guilty of this particular crime. And yet, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders as a judge was enormous. His duty was to the law, but his heart could not ignore the truth in Michael's words and the memories he carried from their childhood. Every glance at Michael brought a flood of emotions: sorrow, hope, nostalgia, and a desire to see justice. done fairly. Daniel knew that the next steps would not just determine the outcome of this case, they would also shape the future of the friend he had once lost and, in some ways, found again. For a moment, the courtroom seemed suspended in time. Friends, family, and strangers watched with bated breath, sensing that this trial was no longer just a matter of evidence. It had become a story about redemption, trust, and the unbreakable bond of friendship tested by the harsh realities of life. During the trial, Daniel listened intently to every word, every piece of evidence presented before him. As a judge, he was trained to remain impartial, to weigh facts without letting personal feelings interfere. But today, the line between professional duty and personal connection blurred in a way he had never experienced. Every detail of the case seemed to pull him in two directions at once. Justice demanded objectivity, but his heart screamed for his childhood friend Michael. The prosecution was relentless. They described the crime in grim detail, portraying Michael as a man hardened by years of poor choices, someone who had repeatedly squandered opportunities for redemption. They presented witnesses who claimed they had seen Michael near the store late at night and argued that he had attacked the store owner in cold blood. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, and Daniel felt the weight of every accusation pressing down not just on Michael, but on the memories of the boy he had once known, and yet something about the story didn't sit right with him. As the prosecution played the store security footage, Daniel squinted at the grainy images on the screen. A figure in a hoodie lurked around the store, moving quickly, almost frantically. But the quality of the footage made it impossible to identify the person clearly. The silhouette seemed taller than Michael, broader, with a gait that didn't match the hesitant movements Daniel remembered from his old friend. Doubts began to creep into his mind, subtle but persistent. Like whispers at the edge of a quiet room, when it was Michael's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. I turned toward him, and Daniel could see the nervous tension in his posture. Michael spoke slowly, carefully choosing each word, aware that the weight of his future hung in the balance. I was near the store that night, he admitted, voice low and trembling. But I didn't go inside. I didn't touch anyone. I've been living on the streets for months. I lost my job, my apartment, everything. That night I was just searching for food in a dumpster. I didn't hurt anyone, I swear it. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. He remembered the bright-eyed boy who had once shared his dreams of adventure, who had always believed in fairness and honesty. To see him now, gaunt, weary, and forced into such desperate circumstances was almost unbearable. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes, though he quickly blinked them away, determined to maintain his composure. He knew the courtroom was watching, and his role required him to be steady, yet the humanity of the moment was undeniable. Michael wasn't denying his mistakes. He had made choices that had led him down difficult paths, but this particular accusation, Daniel realized, might not be true. The contrast between the prosecution's narrative and Michael's account created a tension that seemed to hang in the room like a storm cloud ready to break. Then, just as hope began to feel fragile, a breakthrough came. A witness was called, the store owner's neighbor. He had been outside that night, looking out the window as the events unfolded. When asked to identify the person he had seen running from the crime scene, he hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. It wasn't him, the witness said. It was someone taller, heavier, someone different, definitely not Michael. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Lawyers whispered urgently to one another, the prosecution's confident facade faltering under the weight of this testimony. Slowly, steadily, the cracks in the case against Michael began to show. The narrative that had seemed airtight, that had painted Michael as a dangerous habitual criminal, was now riddled with uncertainty. Daniel felt a strange mix of relief and lingering anxiety. Relief that his friend might be innocent of this particular crime. Anxiety because the trial was far from over. He understood that proving innocence would require careful examination of every detail, every witness, every piece of evidence. But, for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. As he glanced at Michael, he saw a flicker of the boy he had once known beneath the layers of hardship and pain. The spark of life, the resilience that had carried him through so many challenges was still there. And in that moment, Daniel realized that this trial was more than a legal battle. It was a chance at redemption, a chance to restore not just Michael's freedom, but his dignity and sense of hope. The courtroom was tense, the outcome still uncertain, but Daniel knew one thing for certain. He would see this case through with fairness, with compassion, and with the understanding that sometimes the truth is more complicated than it seems. And for Michael, that truth might just save him from a life he never wanted. After hours of testimony, cross-examinations, and careful review of evidence, the courtroom was tense. Every person present, lawyers, spectators, and court staff, waited with bated breath. Even the ticking of the old courtroom clock seemed louder, counting down the moment that would determine Michael's fate. Judge Daniel Carter straightened in his seat, the gavel resting in his hand, and took a deep, steadying breath. His eyes, however, remained locked on the man who had once been his childhood best friend, Michael Harris. Daniel began, his voice calm but firm, echoing slightly off the high ceilings of the courtroom. The evidence presented in this court is not enough to prove your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. Every face in the courtroom turned toward the bench, leaning forward in anticipation. Daniel could feel the tension, the hope, and the fear vibrating in the room. He continued, "Therefore, I have no choice but to declare you not guilty." For a brief moment, the courtroom was frozen in disbelief. Then the tension broke like a dam bursting. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. Some spectators shook their heads, surprised at the outcome, while others leaned back, exhaling in relief. Michael's hands, still cuffed, trembled slightly as he processed the words. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the room around him. For the first time in years, hope returned to his face. It was a hope that had been buried under years of hardship, disappointment, and isolation. Daniel watched silently, feeling a mixture of relief and emotion that he couldn't entirely suppress. His gaze softened, taking in every detail of his old friend's face, the lines etched by struggle, the tired eyes, but also the spark that had always been there, the spark of resilience and life. He could see the boy he had grown up with beneath the layers of pain and misfortune. But before formally closing the case, Daniel leaned slightly forward and spoke directly to Michael, his voice carrying a tone that was personal. Almost fatherly. "Michael, fate brought us back together today," he said, choosing each word carefully. "You've been given another chance. Don't waste it. The boy I once knew was full of kindness, potential, and courage. It's time to find that version of yourself again." Michael nodded, unable to speak through the thick wall of tears that now ran freely down his face. He felt a flood of emotions: relief, gratitude, sorrow for the years lost, and determination to rebuild his life. For him, this verdict wasn't merely freedom from the accusations, it was redemption. A chance to start over, a reminder that even after the darkest periods, life could still offer hope. The courtroom slowly began to empty, but Daniel remained seated for a moment longer, reflecting on everything that had transpired. He thought of the evidence, the testimonies, and the fragile truth he had discerned. But above all, he thought of Michael not just as a defendant, but as a human being who had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged with a chance to reclaim his life. As he finally rose from the bench, Daniel realized the trial had left an indelible mark on him. It reminded him that behind every case, behind every charge, there is a story, a human being with fears, struggles, and hopes. It reminded him that the scales of justice are delicate, and that the line between guilt and innocence is often thinner than anyone can perceive. Outside the courtroom, the sunlight spilled through the tall windows, illuminating Michael's face. As he left with his attorney, Daniel watched him for a moment, seeing a man who was no longer defined by past mistakes, but by the potential to make the choices that lay ahead. There was a quiet pride in Daniel's heart, a sense that despite the hardships, his friend could rise again. As the doors closed behind Michael, Daniel allowed himself a deep, silent sigh. Today had been more than a legal proceeding. It had been a journey through memory, friendship, and justice. It had reminded him of the fragile balance between rules and compassion, between the letter of the law and the human spirit that lived behind it. And as he left the courtroom himself, Daniel knew that this trial, this encounter with a friend from the past, would stay with him forever. It was a story of redemption, resilience, and the enduring power of second chances. It was proof that even when life seems to push people down, sometimes fate offers an unexpected hand to lift them back up. For Michael, it was a new beginning. For Daniel, it was a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life, that justice, tempered with understanding, can restore more than freedom, it can restore hope.